The cave is silent, but not empty. Ash still smolders in the pit where flames once burned through the long night. The smell of charred bone lingers, mixed with damp stone and the faint musk of bodies pressed close together for warmth. Outside, the wind scrapes across a frozen plain. To step beyond the cave mouth is to gamble with death, predators, hunger, cold. Yet to remain inside is to face another kind of peril: starvation, stillness, extinction. We imagine cavemen as grunting brutes, dragging women by the hair, swinging clubs against mammoths. A caricature drawn by later civilizations to make themselves appear more advanced, more civilized, more human. But the truth is stranger, darker, and far more human. These people lived without maps, without writing, without the safety of cities, yet they carried within them all the intelligence, all the fear, all the hope we still possess. Their days were not primitive caricatures, but endless negotiations with hunger, with weather, with death itself. They shaped stone until it could slice flesh. They tended fragile embers as if they were children. They painted shadows on cave walls that outlasted their bodies by 30,000 years. If we strip away the myth, what remains is not a caveman at all. What remains is us, raw, exposed, unarmored, living on the knife's edge of survival. The night has no mercy. It seeps into the marrow, a cold that gnaws without teeth, that tightens around the chest until breath itself feels like surrender. In the darkness, predators prowl, their eyes yellow lanterns in the distance, their patience older than stone. But in the cave, against the rough wall, a single glow resists. Not a flame, not yet, only embers. Small veins of light pulsing like the last heartbeat of a dying body. Someone has watched them all night, not sleeping, not daring, stirring the ash with a stick, breathing gently, guarding the fragile core of warmth. Because if the embers die, everything dies. Fire is not a tool. It is a tether, a fragile rope stretched across the abyss. It is warmth against frost, light against the endless night, safety against the predators waiting beyond the threshold. The morning does not begin with sunlight. It begins with smoke. A hand hovers, trembling, feeding dried grass into the coals. The ember flares, sighs, then swallows the offering. More grass, then twigs, then the dry crack of sticks. At last, flame, thin, fragile, golden, alive. Around it, bodies stir from sleep, their skin marked with the imprints of stone. The fire licks at shadows, painting the walls in trembling light. Its crackle is a lullaby and a warning, both reminding them that life is nothing but a negotiation with this flame, always on the verge of vanishing. Every day begins the same way, with the dread that the fire may not return, with the fragile relief when it does. And though they do not yet have words to confess it, each knows the truth, that without fire they are nothing but prey. They carry its glow in their minds like a secret fear, like a god that must never be angered. And as the flames grow taller, swallowing the cold, one thought lingers unspoken. This warmth is borrowed, this survival temporary, this ember always at risk of turning back into ash. Hunger arrives before the sun climbs. It twists the belly sharp and hollow, gnawing at the ribs like an invisible predator. The people rise not from comfort, but from necessity, moving into the pale morning with eyes already scanning the horizon. The plain stretches endless and cruel, a stage where life is taken and devoured without mercy. Bones scatter here, picked clean, cracked open for marrow. The smell of old blood hangs in the frost, carried on the wind like a warning. At first, survival meant waiting for death to do its work. A lion abandons its kill, a vulture tears loose the first strips of flesh, and only then do trembling hands creep closer. Stones sharpened against stones split hide and tendon, stealing what could be stolen before the scavengers returned. It was not triumph, it was theft. The taste of meat always came with the taste of fear, but hunger teaches more than it destroys. Over time, shadows began to move differently. Men circled together, eyes steady, hands clutching spears hardened in fire. They learned the rhythm of the herd, the weakness of the old, the stumble of the young. A horse flees, an antelope stumbles, and suddenly the air is pierced with cries, human and animal tangled in terror. Spears strike, blood runs hot across cold earth, flesh collapses to silence. Yet victory is never guaranteed. Often the spear misses or breaks, often the prey escapes, leaving only exhaustion and emptiness. Failure is written into their bones as surely as success. Each hunt is a wager, a bet placed with death as the witness, and every body that limps home empty-handed carries the weight of another mouth left unfed. The kill itself is not glory, but labor. Skin must be cut, tendons pulled, the carcass stripped in haste before the scavengers return. Knives dull quickly against bone. Blood coats hands until they are red to the wrist, sticky, trembling. The smell of iron thickens the air, mingling with smoke and sweat. Children watch, silent, their eyes wide as if seeing both salvation and cruelty in the same moment. Hunger is never vanquished. It only waits crouching in the shadows, ready to return with the next sunrise. The ground looks barren at first glance, but the eye trained by hunger sees differently. A cluster of leaves pressed low against the soil, a thorny bush heavy with berries, the faint twist of a root revealing where food waits in silence. Hands reach down, pulling, feeling for weight beneath the dirt. Nails tear, skin splits, but beneath the soil lies sustenance. Not blood, not flesh, but the slow, patient gifts of the earth. This work leaves no spectacle behind, no heroism painted on walls. It is quiet, meticulous, unrelenting. Each season remakes the map of survival. Spring offers tender shoots, summer bursts with fruit, autumn fills baskets with hard-shelled nuts, winter reduces everything to bark, bulbs, and memory. To walk into the wild without this knowledge is to invite death. To carry it is to cradle generations in one's hands. The fire of the hunt burns hot and sudden, but this gathering is steady, enduring. Children eat because of it. Old ones survive because of it. While men return bloodied, sometimes empty-handed, these gatherers return daily with something that can be chewed, boiled, crushed, stored. Hunger is answered not by the thrust of a spear, but by the quiet persistence of searching fingers. And though no songs remain of their work, the proof lingers in bones and teeth. Microscopic traces of seeds, fibers, and herbs still cling to the mouths of the long dead. Whispers of plants that kept them alive. Their strength lay not in violence, but in remembrance, the memory of which stem heals, which berry kills, which root carries bitterness that can be washed away with fire. The invisible world they harvested was never celebrated, but it was the true spine of survival. In silence, in patience, they bore the weight of mouths that never thanked them, of lives that never noticed they were being carried. Survival did not roar. It knelt, it dug, it gathered in shadows. Stone lies everywhere, but only some pieces answer when struck. A hand feels its weight, turns it, searching for the fracture hidden inside. Then the blow hard, precise. A spark of sound sharper than the wind, and a shard breaks free, edges keen as a predator's tooth. Edges that cut flesh, slice hide, carve bone. Each strike is a wager with patience, each mistake a waste of time that cannot be reclaimed. This is not creation in bursts of triumph. It is repetition, hours upon hours, fingers raw, wrists aching, dust clinging to skin. The stone resists, then yields, then betrays, snapping when it should not. Around every fire circle lie the failed attempts, misshapen cores, broken blades, echoes of labor lost. Yet the work begins again because without tools, there is no life. The body remembers the rhythm, the wrist twist, the measured strike. The silence after impact, shards scatter like glass, bright against the earth. These tools are not luxuries, they are the thin line separating hunger from a meal, cold from clothing, exposure from shelter. A single cutting edge means marrow drawn from bone, hide stripped clean, wood shaped into a spear, and when the edge is dull, they must be born again. Each tool is fragile, temporary, wearing down with every use, demanding endless attention. There is no permanence, only the cycle: create, use, repair, replace. Flesh feeds bone. Bone feeds stone. Stone feeds flesh again. Even when stone was not enough, other materials answered: antler, ivory, splintered bone, each carved with quiet devotion, shaped into needles, hooks, barbs, tools that made other things possible. Clothing, nets, shelters, firewood. They are the hidden labor of existence, the unending chorus of survival.
Nothing about them feels heroic. They are not the dazzling trophies of art, not the grand shadows painted on cave walls. They are mundane, repetitive, exhausting, but in their silence lies the truth. Survival was not forged in moments of glory, but in the relentless, grinding patience of hands against stone. Every scar on those hands, every blister and callus, carried the memory of this truth: life was a task without end. Sharpened and dulled, sharpened again, until the hands themselves became as worn as the tools they made. The wind has no mercy. It tears across the plains, slips through cracks in stone, seeps into the flesh until even the bones feel brittle. A fire may warm the skin, but it cannot shield the body from endless storms or relentless rain. For that, another kind of labor is required: the making of walls where none exist. Few were blessed with caves deep enough to hold them. Most carved their homes out of impermanence. Branches bent into arcs, lashed with sinew, mammoth bones stacked in rings, covered with hides stripped of fat and blood, stitched together by needles carved from antler. Each shelter was a fragile heartbeat against the weight of the earth. A single gust could tear it open. A single season could rot it away. Yet still they built, because the body must rest, and even a night's rest in the open could mean death. Inside, there was no luxury. A hearth in the center, smoke crawling up and clinging to the roof. Sleeping hollows, pressed into the dirt, softened only by skins. Food drying near the fire, tools scattered like broken teeth. The air thick with sweat, with the stench of hides, with the sourness of breath pressed too close together. Maintenance was constant. Poles replaced when they split, hides scraped clean again when mold crept in. Fires tended so that sparks would not eat the walls. Nothing stood still. The house itself was alive, always threatening to collapse, always demanding attention. And when the earth shifted, when floods came or prey moved on, these shelters were abandoned. Bones left in circles, hides carried until they rotted, hearths extinguished and left behind like hollow graves. Nothing was permanent, not even home. The wind always returned. The cold always found its way through the cracks. And every night, as bodies curled against one another beneath fragile walls, there was the same silent truth. This shelter was never safety, only a pause before the next storm. The fire throws long shadows against the stone, and within them children move. They are not sheltered from the world. They are folded into it. Small hands reach toward sparks, testing how close skin can come before pain flares. Small feet tread paths already worn by older ones, mimicking the motions of grinding seeds, scraping hides, sharpening stone. Childhood is not a place of protection. It is an apprenticeship to survival. There are no toys, only remnants. A broken blade becomes a plaything, its edge dulled by cautious parents. A stick is a spear. A strip of hide is twisted into knots until it frays. Play is imitation, but imitation is rehearsal for hunger, for labor, for death. The lessons are not spoken, they are absorbed.
silently, by watching the movements of hands that work until they bleed. And yet, within this harshness, tenderness persists. A mother's palm rests against a child's head as she chews food and places it, softened, into a smaller mouth. A father steadies tiny fingers against a tool so they do not slip and slice. The band carries its young together when legs grow tired, when fever strikes, when eyes grow dim in sickness. No one survives alone, and so even the smallest body is guarded, for its loss would fracture more than the family. Some skeletons tell of children who never grew old, but others, scarred by disease or injury, show signs of healing that could only have come from care. A twisted spine carried for years, a shattered limb mended slowly, proof that the weak were not abandoned, but held within the circle of firelight until their strength returned, or until the fire outlived them. Children learned not through instruction but through immersion, their innocence burned away by necessity. They carried stones heavier than their arms could bear, followed hunters into silence, repeated the songs hummed by mothers at the hearth. They were never spared the truth that survival is borrowed, that warmth is temporary, that every lesson is written against the glow of flames that could vanish by dawn. The walls of the cave are more than stone. By firelight they begin to breathe, to shimmer with shapes that do not belong to flesh alone. Hands dip into crushed ochre, into soot and ash, pressing pigment against the rock. Fingers trace the outline of beasts, massive, horned, leaping, eternal. In silence they paint the very hunger that drives them, the terror that stalks them, the awe that crushes them beneath its weight. Each mark is more than decoration. It is defiance against forgetting. The animals they cannot always catch are reborn in red and black, larger than life, towering above the flickering fire. Some are pierced with arrows drawn in pigment, victories imagined into permanence. Others leap free of hunters, as if even art cannot chain them. The walls become a mirror, a shadow world where survival is rewritten as memory, as prophecy. And then there is music, bone-hollowed, drilled with holes, lifted to the lips. A sound emerges, fragile, wavering, but recognizably human, as if breath itself refuses silence. The tones echo against stone, weaving with the crackle of flames, with the rhythm of hands beating against stretched hide. It is not melody for pleasure, but ritual, a binding of hearts in the face of despair. No one remembers the first song. No one remembers the first painted beast, but their presence lingers across thousands of winters, surviving longer than the bodies that made them. They are messages left for the dark. We were here, we feared, we dreamed, and in those dreams lies the first proof that survival was never enough. To simply eat, to sleep, to hunt and die, that was not the whole of existence. Even in hunger, even in grief, they reached for something beyond. They carved lines into bone, not for utility but for beauty. They traced spirals into ivory as if eternity could be held in the curl of a tusk. The shadows on the walls do not speak of triumph. They whisper of longing, of voices trying to outlast the silence. Every stroke of pigment, every note on a hollow bone, is an unspoken plea against the void. Do not let us disappear. Across the horizon, other fires burn. Other hands strike stone. Other mouths chew roots. Other eyes scan the same endless plain. They are not alone, and that knowledge carries both hope and dread. A stranger's face may mean new blood, new tools, new knowledge carried from distant valleys, or it may mean death, swift and merciless, delivered before words can be exchanged. The first sight of another band is silence, a tension that tightens the chest, that forces every hand to grip its spear tighter. Bodies stand rigid, waiting for the first move, the first gesture that decides whether the ground becomes a place of trade or a place of killing. The air tastes of iron, even before blood is spilled. When peace holds, it is fragile. Baskets of nuts exchanged for meat, shells from the sea traded for flint from the mountains. A woman leaves with strangers, her absence carried like a wound and a bridge both. For a moment, survival broadens. For a moment, hunger is eased. But when peace fails, there is no warning. A spear thrust through the chest, a stone crashing against bone, screams erupt, sharp as lightning, then fade into the guttural silence of death. Skeletons unearthed millennia later still bear the scars, fractured skulls, shattered ribs, blades embedded where flesh once pulsed. Proof that even in a world of scarcity, cruelty found its way into human hands. Yet these moments of blood are rare, carved into memory precisely because they shattered the fragile fabric that held people together. More often, the fires were shared, the food divided, the silence stretched into uneasy trust. But the risk was always there, crouching like a shadow at the edge of every meeting. Every band knew the truth. The earth gave little, and sometimes what it gave was not enough for all. The ground beneath their feet could become grave or sanctuary in a heartbeat, and in that fragile balance, every stranger was both salvation and threat, every greeting laced with the possibility of betrayal. The earth itself was never still. Ice crept down from the north like a slow beast, swallowing valleys, grinding mountains into dust. Rivers shifted their beds, forests withered, deserts spread like wounds across the land. To live meant to follow, to abandon hearths and shelters, to walk until feet split and bled. Home was never a place, it was the act of moving, again and again against the endless turning of the sky. The cold struck like a blade, carving the flesh with wind so sharp it left no scar, only numbness. In the great freezes, animals vanished or grew gaunt, herds thinning until the hunt became a gamble with famine. Firewood grew scarce, breath froze as it left the lungs, and then just as suddenly warmth returned, swelling rivers with meltwater, flooding plains, choking camps with insects that carried fever. Each shift was merciless, a reminder that no labor, no knowledge, no memory could tame the earth. Yet they endured. They learned to burn grassland so new growth would return, drawing animals back to graze. They marked the cycles of berries, the migrations of birds, the first green shoots after snow. They listened to the language of seasons, a language spoken in silence, in absence, in the slow death of familiar things. Every path they walked became written into their bodies, their bones bearing the signs of hunger, their teeth scarred by years of scarcity, their muscles hardened by endless movement. They were witnesses to the earth's memory, carrying within them the grief of landscapes that vanished before their eyes. And still they pressed forward. Across ice, across sea, across deserts that cracked their lips and emptied their bellies. Not conquerors, but wanderers bound to a world that shifted beneath their feet. Each migration was a surrender, a confession whispered into the wind. The earth is vast, and we are small. The land remembered long after they were gone. It held their footsteps in mud, their hearths in ash, their bones in soil. The earth forgets nothing, and it reminds us that survival was never victory, only endurance carved against time. The bones of the dead lie silent, but they are not empty. In their ribs are traces of hunger, in their teeth the memory of roots and seeds, in their skulls the marks of blows long healed. They do not speak, yet their silence is heavier than words. What remains of them is not myth, not the crude shadow of cavemen dragging women by the hair, but something far more unsettling: ourselves, stripped of every disguise. They were no less human. They feared the dark, and yet they carried fire against it. They trembled with hunger, and yet they searched for berries beneath the frost. They held children close, pressed their foreheads together, and hummed songs that could not be written, only carried on the breath. Their lives were not primitive caricatures, but raw negotiations with death, repeated each morning, each night without reprieve. Look closely, and you see the mirror. The hand that chipped flint into a blade is the same hand that now holds a pen, or a screen, or another hand. The mouth that blew across a hollow bone is the same mouth that now speaks prayers or curses or love. The hunger that drove them across frozen plains is the same hunger that drives us still, never satisfied, always searching, always fearing what waits in the silence beyond the firelight. They left more than tools and bones. They left shadows painted on stone, lines of red and black that still tremble when struck by flame. They left proof that even at the edge of extinction, the human spirit reached for meaning, for beauty, for something that could endure. And in those handprints pressed against cave walls, we see the truth. Not a brute, not a monster, but a person reaching forward through time, leaving the mark of existence for us to find. What remains is not their weakness, but their resilience. What remains is not their savagery, but their endurance. What remains is not their silence, but their echo. An echo that tells us we are them, and they are us, bound by the same fragile fire, the same gnawing hunger, the same fleeting hope that the marks we leave behind will outlast the night.